As you can see on the screen, we have a contact slide for Mr. Fatula, for Reverend Harper, and for Jeannie Blaustein, our commentator, who is the chair of the Reimagine End of Life organization. She will be doing leading our conversation today. So if you'd like to take a picture of the contact slide with your phone, I can always put it up at the end of the presentation as well, but feel free to take a picture. Okay, Vicki, take it away.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. So a little bit of a background. First of all, my name is Vicki Ellner. I am the Outreach and Community, Government Affairs Consultant with Ronald Fatula and Associates. And we conceived this idea for a book author discussion. We started this back in June. Tonight, we're very proud to be welcoming Lynn Casteel Harper, author of On Vanishing, Jeannie Blaustein, who is the founding board chair of Reimagine End of Life. And of course, our host tonight, Ronald Fatula of Ronald Fatula and Associates, who when we bring these ideas to him, he supports it wholeheartedly. And I think that you will all be very inspired as well as educated and intrigued. And also, it's very sobering, as we all know. And the statistics relevant to dementia, Alzheimer's, is a very sobering fact. So I took this information, I think, to set up the evening tonight. But just a little bit of background. We are doing what's called Beyond the Book, and really it's the stories behind authors, which brings these discussions. So we really hope that you will engage and ask questions, and also buy the book. So afterwards. So in On Vanishing, our author, Lynn Casteel Harper, who is a Baptist minister and a nursing home chaplain, investigates the myths and metaphors surrounding dementia and aging, addressing not only the indignities caused by the condition, but also by the rhetoric surrounding it. Lynn asks essential questions about the nature of our outsized fear of dementia, the stigma this fear may create, and what it might mean for all of us to try to vanish well. And I think the subtitle on her book, On Vanishing, Mortality, Dementia, and What It Means to Disappear, really summarizes that. So I'm going to turn this over to Jackie, who will introduce our speakers and our host tonight. And thank you once again for attending.
Thank you, Vicki. I saw a comment that there was a little bit of an echo. So if everyone could all of our participants, if you could please make sure that you are muted, which you should be, that will definitely eliminate some of any background noise that we might be having. And, I will try to keep an eye on that. First of all, I'd like to thank my wonderful boss, Ronald Fatula, who is the most amazing elder law attorney in New York, as in the country, as well as just a wonderful person and an honor to work with. Ron has been dedicated for almost 40 years to helping those that need assistance, whether they be older folks or whether they are disabled. And he's done so much throughout his career, not only personally for his clients, but legislatively to change the laws in New York to make life better for all of us, especially those who are aging and in need of long-term care. He is the chair of the Long Island Alzheimer's Association Board of Directors, and very, very dedicated to helping to create a world one day when we do not have Alzheimer's or dementia. And one of the most wonderful things about him is his commitment to that end. But he is a certified elder law attorney, which means that he really knows the ins and outs of being prepared not only for long-term care, but to do your estate planning, protect your assets, and to make sure that you have everything in place so that the wishes that you want for your end of life and to pass on to your children are there one day. And I'll let him talk to you a little bit more about what he does when he speaks. We're very, very excited to have Reverend Harper here tonight. We've had the opportunity to work with her on a project that was hosted by Grey Panthers, which was a remembrance to all those who died from COVID in the nursing homes the past 2 years. And she is just an amazing woman, an amazing pastor. And reading her book has really moved me and opened my mind to think about things with regard to cognitive decline in so many different ways. And I lost my father as well to dementia. So the book really hit home for me. But she is also, an author and spent several years working on this project. So we're really, really excited to have her here tonight. And she's going to be in discussion with Jeannie Blaustein, who is the director of Reimagine End of Life. Jeannie has worked with us on another project earlier with Rabbi Leader, and we just knew when we wanted to entertain the thought of Reverend Harper doing a presentation on her book that Jeannie was the perfect person to engage in conversation with her. She is an amazing person. She also has a degree in divinity and has a PhD in ministry. She is just an amazing woman and works with people all the time to help them deal with grief and with taking their, life beyond getting, the pain and that they're experiencing and moving on and looking for the beauty in what remains. So and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ron Fatula for his remarks.
Thank you. And I'll just take a couple of minutes. It's truly my honor to be a part of this, to host this. I'm very excited about it. I do want to thank Vicki so much and Jackie, you so much for putting this all together, and Jeannie for getting involved, and Reverend Harper for being here, because we're all very excited about this. Alzheimer's disease, dementias has been something that has shaped my life, the disease, in so many different ways. I remember my grandmother who had dementia so many years ago and passed away from dementia. It was so tragic and so difficult to deal with that. When I became an attorney, I always wanted to be a music lawyer. And so that's what I did. I did that for several years, but I had to go back and do something that made more sense to my inner soul. And when I became an elder law attorney and started to help individuals with all sorts of things as they age, and I recognized that, believe it or not, about 80% of clients call us because a family member has dementia. And then, of course, we do all sorts of planning for long-term care, estate planning, estate tax planning. We do all of this, guardianship work, but that was it. In essence, I found my calling. And that's why I'm so excited about this. And I remember from the 80s until I would say about 18 years ago, my mother then of clients deal with disease, living through this through my clients, and then being a caregiver. My brother and I were caregivers, helping my mother and being with her every step of the way when she was home. We visited her every day, at least one of us. Then she went into an assisted living. We were there every single day. And she got help in an assisted living that we paid for. We were there every day as well. And then for the last year of her life, she went into a nursing home. And again, one of us, either my brother or I, were there every single day for her. And to see her decline was so tragic. And towards the end, she didn't know, who we were at all. I remember that the doctor suggested that we do place her in a nursing home because there were nurses on staff. That's what a nursing home does. And she actually rallied a little bit physically when she went to the nursing home, but cognitively, she was about the same, and to see that decline was so difficult. I do remember, this is about 6 months before my mother passed away. And I know you're not supposed to do this, so it just happened. I asked my mother, I said, "Mom, do you know who I am?" Blank stare back. I said, "Mom, do you know who I am?" Blank stare back. And I did it one more time, and then I was gonna not get involved. I said, "Mom, do you know who I am?" And I couldn't believe this because there was no reaction from her for so long. She looked at me, shrugged her shoulders, and went like this: "I just love you." And that was my gift. She really couldn't connect, or maybe she could connect on a certain level and somehow got the strength or some connection to just let me know that she was still there loving me, but she really couldn't communicate. So I'm just so pleased, to be able to host this. I'm very active with the Alzheimer's Association. I actually chaired their legal committee for about 30 years. And now right now I'm chairman of the board in Long Island, and I'm very involved in New York City. And we just had our walk last week. Just yesterday. What am I talking about last week? Yesterday and the day before in Long Island. It was a long day for me. And we do have a walk next Sunday in Eisenhower Park if anybody's interested. And the New York City, they're also very involved, and I'm involved with them as well. So I urge anyone who can contribute in any way you can to help out, whether it's financially for the association or whether you could volunteer or be there and just being involved with this. I think it's elevating our connection to the disease, which means that more people will have a voice somehow, some way. With this book, Reverend Harper, I'm so excited about this. Jeannie, who is just, both of you, I know are so spiritual and getting to the heart of this. So I'm very excited. I want to turn this over to Jeannie, I guess, right? Jackie, okay. Jeannie, I'm going to turn this over to you. It's such a pleasure to be able to host this. Thank you so much, Reverend Harper and Jeannie, for being involved. And take it away, Jeannie.
Ron, thank you so much. And thank you to Vicki and Jackie for putting together this wonderful program. And I just have to say, Lynn, it is such a pleasure to have this opportunity to be in conversation with you about your incredible book. Just as a little background, you and I met several years ago now before Reimagine launched its first festival in New York City. And at that point, you were already working at Riverside with seniors. And I have to confess, I fell totally in love with you. And we were both involved in the Grey Panthers program that Jackie referenced earlier. And then we actually got to meet each other by coincidence on the street last June during primary day here in New York City. So I'm very grateful that the universe has now brought us together, thanks to Ron and his team, to have this conversation. So I want everyone to know that this book is indeed a beautifully written book. It is a powerful book, but it's also a beautifully written book. And so that I just want to emphasize that, because for a topic which certainly arouses lots of feelings and questions and emotions, it's really nice to be able to read something that is so beautifully written, that carries us from psychology to anthropology, from spiritual interviews with luminaries like Merton and Augustine to writers like Emerson and Thoreau and Keats, and to artwork and music. And you just bring us deeply in through the personal. You bring in the political, and then you bring it right back to the personal. So I encourage everyone to give yourselves the gift of reading this book. And as was mentioned earlier, we know that dementia is on the rise. We are living longer and longer as medical advances unfold. And you share even that dementia is now the 6th largest cause of death in the US, which is quite astonishing. It's one of the illnesses that people fear the most. And we know that caregiving challenges of living with or loving somebody with dementia can, in some cases, be quite crushing. But you have not written a book about this. You have not written a book that is a how-to guide for caregivers, or a wellness book about how to avoid dementia by doing puzzles and all the other things that we're told in popular literature. This is a really different kind of book. You've written a wise, poetic, and provocative exploration of dementia itself and the ways in which we, as members of a particular cultural group, behave and talk about people with cognitive decline. So just at the outset, I want to thank you for challenging us and giving us the opportunity to face this illness and this particular stage of life with fresh eyes and an open heart. So let's get started. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Jeannie. I'm so humble and full. That introduction is so gracious. And Ron and Vicki and Jackie, thank you so much. I just feel just so humbled to be together and with those on the call as well, that this is not just any topic for discussion. This hits us in an existential place in a way that other conditions don't. And so I hope we can just kind of take a deep breath and step into this space.
Wonderful. So on that advice from you, I'm going to take a deep breath. And I want to acknowledge that you come to this book from a very personal place, as well as from deep professional experience through your work with seniors and of course in your own life. So I'm wondering if you would tell us a bit more about than we already have heard about what brought you to really investigate dementia and to write this beautiful book.
So yeah, it's the dovetailing of my professional and my personal life. You know, as that happens, Ron talks about finding his calling. We sometimes just accidentally fall into it, or maybe in my tradition, we'd say providentially. But I didn't set out on this journey. It sort of found me through my grandfather's last decade of his life, lived with Alzheimer's disease. So I saw it up close and personal in my family, have a strong family history on both my mother and my father's side of dementia. And then as a very newly minted chaplain, I just finished my chaplaincy training and my MDiv program. My very first full-time job was at a retirement community. And I was assigned to the skilled nursing and assisted living facility. On my very first day, I was given a tour. And when we came to the 4th floor of a 5-floor building, the dementia unit, my guide, who was a perfectly kind gentleman, told me I probably wouldn't spend much time here. And the message was consistent with sort of a dementia phobic culture that says these people are so lost, they're so gone, disappeared from themselves, that, we're expected to kind of disappear from them, that they're not worth our best time and energy. And with 200 residents in that facility, it's probably best to go to people who will remember you once you leave. And I can remember that day feeling, when my spiritual antenna is working correctly, I wonder if this says something more about us than about them. And what I found out is that I ended up spending more time on this unit than anywhere else. And the people that day who seemed like a blur of disability all of a sudden became individuals with names and histories and stories, people who desired to be known and to know, who had gifts to share, who had love to bring, perhaps in ways that were non-traditional in the ways we usually communicate. But it was that coming close to people in my own family and the people I worked with that led me to want to write about this and to want to write about what about this message that tells us to disappear from them.
Wow. That is so powerful, because I think that we back away, as you say, and this was even really your mandate from your new supervisor, right? To not spend much time there. And I'm very struck by your decision to come closer and to see what might be discovered, what might look different, but to see what you might find in these people and even in the relationship, and that in fact they had not fully vanished. And you've called your book On Vanishing. And you note that Alzheimer's is often referred to as the long goodbye. We face, I think, what you also describe as an outsized dread in living in a dementia-phobic culture. So what is it about dementia in particular, do you think, that stirs our fears in a particular way, so differently maybe than other diseases, and that makes us really pull away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fear kind of has that shrinking effect, as you say, Jeannie. Sort of, yeah, we pull back from ourselves and from others as well. I think dementia, more than other conditions, confronts us with our own being, what makes us human, in a way perhaps other conditions don't. So I say, kidney disease impacts filtration, and heart disease impacts circulation, but brain disease impacts communication with ourselves and others, and with the divine. And so what does that mean for us and our humanness? And that kicks up fears that we're somehow, when we're experiencing cognitive change or cognitive decline, that we're becoming less human. And so we've all heard that I think, therefore I am, which we inherit from Descartes, which has some pretty heavy baggage. Because what that says is, if I have trouble thinking, then I become less of a being. And I think I want to push back against that, and others want to push back against that and say, no, cognitive change doesn't mean that you're becoming less of a human, but more human. We're all on this journey of loss and gain, of living and dying, of vanishing and not vanishing. But I think the fear really surrounds that existential question. And I also want to say the fear is sort of stoked through the stigma in our culture. And so people hide their dementia diagnoses, or they delay getting them. People report losing friends after disclosing diagnoses. And so our culture makes it even more fearful, because there is that stigma. So I think the fear is both natural and unnatural, in the sense that it's imposed from without. And I guess the question is, what do we do with the fear? I think there's something more than fear that we can feel and that we can respond to. And that's one reason I wrote this book, is to highlight some of those stories that aren't just about fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that might be a perfect segue. You shared in the book that, for example, with your grandpa Jack, that it wasn't just a vanishing, and it wasn't just a specter. He wasn't a specter that you needed to fear, and that in fact he had been a very powerful figure. And as things started to shift, a certain kind of intimacy became possible. I wonder if you might say a few words and maybe even read a little from the book.
Oh, sure. Yes. My grandfather was sort of a larger than life kind of persona. And he was a physician and a philanthropist and traveler. And so as a child, he was always sort of at a remove, I felt. There wasn't a lot of that intimacy. And that's a little taboo to say, right? You're supposed to be really close with your grandparents and have this warm relationship. Well, it wasn't the case for me. Love, admiration, but not a lot of warmth or closeness. And in his years with dementia, there was a new tenderness that sort of opened up in him. And this was a man, of a certain generation who, kept kind of some protective shielding up. And some of that began to sort of fall, and he was able to, I think, sit in stillness in a new way. And I certainly experienced our relationship as changing. And so I'd love to read just a little bit about that, if you will. Thank you for inviting me to do so. And maybe others who have had experiences with living or loving someone with dementia can think about some of their untold stories as I read as well. So, my grandfather had enjoyed center stage, relished the spotlight, whether he was singing solos in church or serving as the Rotarian state governor or organizing a veterans group and writing its newsletters. Jack was unafraid of prominence, always working on important projects, always instructing, always on the move. His transparent passion made him radiant. I admired my grandfather, but did not feel close to him. He seemed always above, remote, on stage. By design, stage lighting makes it easy for the audience to see the actors and hard for the actors to see the audience. I felt like the approving audience member, always seeing but never really being seen. And he, the faraway performer, was always being seen but never really seeing beyond the stage. My grandmother once told me that she saw her role as the hand clapper for her husband. She said this as a point of fact, not contention. She likely felt the spectator's distance too. In my grandfather's late dementia, I experienced a new tenderness in him. As the spotlights darkened and the house lights softly came up, he was no longer on stage. He was in a wheelchair. He lived in a nursing home where no one knew him from any other old veteran. He did not speak much. He hummed on occasion. My memories of him in these months are candlelit. The circle of light he emanated was small but warm. A new stillness eclipsed his earlier frenetic disposition. At first, it was hard to receive this new faintness as a gift. It was hard for my eyes to adjust to darkening after staring into brightness for so long. It was hard to see anything at all. But once I adjusted to the lower light, I felt a kind of exhalation, relief. For the first time in my life, I sat with my grandfather, eye to eye. No showing, no telling, no clapping. While his past light had beamed, attracting my attention and admiration, but rarely my affection, his new darkling light was inviting, even gentle.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful representation of that shift as the bright light that really surrounded your grandpa's active years began to fade. And as you said, there was a lower light and your eyes needed to adjust. It wasn't like you could see it right away. Kind of like what Ron described at the beginning, do you know me? Do you know me? And then, is there communication or not? I would say yes. When she said, I love you to Ron, that to me feels like a very powerful, undeniable communication, but maybe in a different light, maybe with a different hue.
Yes, that's a beautiful way you put that, Jeannie. Yeah, our eyes do have to adjust, and to say that the light is lower is not to say that your humanity has gotten lower or diminished, but that those of us whose eyes have to adjust, we have to see your humanity in a new way. You're no longer an actor on stage. You've come down. Mm-hmm. We're sitting together. Mm-hmm. There's no above or below. We're now at the same level, and we meet at the level of our shared humanness, which isn't about showing off our intellectual capacity, but it's about a capacity to love, to share affection, tenderness, a touch, even to share silence. I mentioned my grandfather had very few words, and I had to learn to sit in silence. Mm-hmm. And at first that's so hard because in our culture, we're talk oriented, right? We're doing it now.
We produce, we make, we do, we are doers. We are not beers.
We are not beers.
It's very, very hard. Very hard to find that kind of stillness and that kind of quiet.
Mm-hmm. I learned from a daughter who would come often and sit with her mother on the dementia unit. And I asked her one day, how do you do it? Or what is your secret? And she said, she called it companionable silence. Mm-hmm. And I just loved that. The idea that it's friendly silence, because silence is often like, I'm giving you the silent treatment. It's out of anger or passive aggression. But no, this is companionable silence, and that's okay. That's where we meet in a certain light, in a certain place.
I'm very touched by that phrase. And of course, we know that dementia is affecting millions of people today, and that some people are indeed discovering that kind of companionable silence where they are experiencing a new kind of sweetness like you were able to find with your grandfather. It's also true, of course, that many are living with great anguish around the agitation and the anger, sometimes the danger to self or others, uncertainty about managing someone's care. And you write about I'm going to quote you, the disorienting discontinuities and ruptured relationships that often accompany dementia. So you are, as I read your book, I really felt that you were giving us an invitation to see into, as you just said, the humanity, the depth of another's soul, no matter what they can say or do or produce. But as people are struggling with this kind of intimate grief, how do you speak to folks who are in the thick of it, on the front lines of caregivers and danger and all of the madness and chaos that can also be part of living or loving someone with dementia?
That's right, Jeannie. I think it's all of the above. We say yes, and that it can be moments of great joy and peace and stillness, and there can be suffering and grief and anguish, that it's all of it. And I think what my book I'm trying to speak to is often we only tell one half of that story. We only tell about anguish and loss and terror and horror. And the other side doesn't get told or acknowledged, or we just say, oh, that was just a blip on the screen, or that wasn't real. Mm-hmm. When we can say it's all real. And so if we can find safe spaces to cry, to share the anger, the guilt, the sadness, and to also share the laughter and the joy and the lesser told stories, if we can find spaces to hold that all. And I also want to say too, I hope for those of us who maybe aren't in that direct caregiving role right now, that we're able to find ways to make the world a gentler place for those who are. That we become the kind of people and the kind of communities wherever we find ourselves, whether that's faith communities or law firms or Reimagine End of Life, that we create community that welcomes difference, that welcomes cognitive difference and physical differences and age spectrum and just the spectrum of humanity. And so that people can find those spaces in people where it's safe to say it all, to live out loud, sort of, with all the mess of it.
With all of it, yes. I want to ask you a question about that. It makes me think about support groups and various opportunities for folks to come together. And as you say, to kind of share some of the really dark stuff. I wonder how easy it is to share the joy or the little moments of discovery or tenderness in the midst of being in a circle of folks who are really struggling or suffering. I wonder if you've observed ways to kind of encourage or support us noticing those, what in my family we like to call pretty little moments, where something beautiful is noticed.
Something beautiful is noticed. Yeah, to take the time, especially when the tide is one of horror and terror and anguish. How do we lift that up? And I think there's no secret formula. We just do it. And sometimes I think it's hard when, for instance, like when my mother was very, in the thick of the caregiving, sometimes it took those a step out to say, oh, Grandpa and I enjoyed the song together today. Mm. And, his smile today, just because she had trouble seeing it, doing the day to day, which is understandable. Mm-hmm. So for those of us who are wrung out, if we can narrate the story, it doesn't have to be a big story, but if we can highlight that person's, joy or the way they encouraged me today. Mm-hmm. And that was the gift of being a chaplain, is I could kind of walk into people's lives and not carry all this history of who this person has been. And I could step in and say, oh, Anna's just the life of the party, or, mm-hmm. Or that hug that your father gave me today was just so encouraging. I needed that.
It reminds me of a story that I remember when my grandmother was in a nursing home at the very end of her life with Alzheimer's, and I was a teenager. And I remember visiting. I visited her quite often, even as a teenager. And one day, she worked on this arts and crafts. She was a very forceful woman when she, was lucid. She worked on this beaded glass, and I saw that she got help, and she gave it to me as a gift. And I remember walking back. The nursing home was within walking distance of my home in Queens. And I walked back home and I said, Ma, this is so depressing. Grandma worked on this, and she was so vibrant, and she worked on this little beaded glass, and she stuck, these beads on it's like a putty. It was just, to me, it was depressing. And I looked at my mother for a reaction, and she said, she was very happy to give this to you. Did she look upset? I said, no, she looked happy. I was the one who was upset. She said, be happy for her. And it was beautiful. You have a gift from her. This is where she's at now. We loved her before. We love where she's at now. We can't change this. And I remember that was such a beautiful lesson to me. And I just picture this this cup, this green cup with this green putty around it and the few beads that she placed into this cup. And she was on some level very proud of it. And my perception changed from that moment on. It's funny how I remember that, because this was so many years ago.
Wow, that's such a powerful story. I mean, and so apropos, because it's she wanted to give you a gift, and then to be able to receive it is our challenge, because we want to hold someone to a different time or a different standard. But thank God you received it. And even if at the time it was a little befuddling, or it took your mom to highlight the gift. And I think that gets at the core of so much of what my hope is that we don't only see people with dementia as people we go to and we give them our gift as if they're charity cases, and we come with all this wonderfulness, and isn't that nice that we spend a little time with them? No, actually, I'm a better person. I'm a better minister. I'm a better human because of coming to know people living with dementia. The gifts that I've received are sometimes hard to articulate, but I'm transformed. And when we cut off the gifts of a part of our population, we're made less whole. And so I've learned humility. I've learned humor. I'm learning, not have learned, am learning. Spontaneity, how to let go a little bit, those of us in certain positions, we want to control everything and we always want to be prepared and perfect. But people living with dementia are teaching me that there's more to life than being perfect. It's really about presence and compassion, less about cognitive showing off.
Your exchange here and Ron, your beautiful story reminds me of, the fact that none of us live in a vacuum. Anyone who's ever been in a playground and has seen a toddler fall down, the first thing they do is they turn around, they look to see what the reaction of their caregiver is, right? Should I be frightened? Should I cry? Should I get up and go back to the jungle gym? What should I do? And it occurred to me reading your book, Lynn, that that folks with dementia, that we are also giving each other cues, those with cognitive decline and those who are not yet experiencing such significant cognitive decline. I mean, I will say I'm certainly experiencing some cognitive decline, as a 60-year-old. So I think, first of all, the line between us and them is not such a line. I think that's very important. But also, I wonder if you could, and you started to say this just now about the gifts that you've received, but what does it mean to be in this kind of relationship and to see this kind of being as different, as not better, not worse, but just as another expression of our humanity? How do you do that?
Isn't that the question in almost all of our relationships? How do we make this not so flat and round, make it rounded? And I think what happens with people with dementia, at least what I've observed, is that they receive the label, so a diagnosis or a label, and then everything gets routed through that. And so their primary identity is then one of patient. And whereas we carry many identities, somehow it all gets routed through patient and defect. And so everything, every expression, so when someone is angry, that's said to be a symptom of their disease. Or if someone's upset or crying, it must be a symptom of their disease, as opposed to maybe the distress that humans feel. And maybe we can address the source of that distress, or maybe it's okay to cry. When you or I go for a walk, I don't always know where I'm going on a walk, but someone doesn't say to me, "You're wandering." She's wondering. She's a wanderer. But we do that for people with dementia who decide to walk. We call them wanderers. So that label and that gets really narrow. So I think when we're talking about relationships, what does it mean to hold people in multiple roles? To say, yes, you have dementia, and you're a loving partner, and you're a caring parent, and you were a teacher, and you were active in your faith community. All of these things. And that doesn't get wiped away, it changes. But if I only identify by your deficit, then we're losing something of the rounded picture of who you are. And so I'll just give an example.
Yeah.
My grandfather, was a country physician his whole life. And so he delivered babies, he held the hand of the dying, he did sort of everything for this small mining community in Missouri, where he was one of the only physicians. And so when he went into a dementia care unit facility, one of the first days before they got to know him, he was still in that mode of physician, and he would, guide walkers, and he was still in that kind of care mode. And a woman had fallen, and he went down to help pick her up, and I think ended up kind of pulling her arm or, something, and it wasn't a clean scene, we'll say that. And so they called my mother and said, your father is aggressive. He pulled this woman's arm. And anyway, after some discussion, and they then shift their orientation. My mother's, he's not aggressive. He's a carer. This is who he is. And so they began to call him Dr. Jack and relate to him as a part of the care team, as opposed to just a patient. And there was never other incidents after that. But that to say, if we only relate to agitation or and see behaviors that way, we miss something. They would have missed the sweetness of this other role that he cherished. But it needs a play partner, someone to acknowledge it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're reminding us, I think, that once a diagnosis is given, right? Once a label, as you say, is assigned and somebody becomes a patient, it erases not only all of their other roles, but also any sense of ambiguity about who this person might be or what state they're in. They become sort of fixed. And we live in a culture that does not do well with ambiguity. Things are day and night, and good and evil, and awake and asleep, and things are real or they're not real, illusory. I also think as Americans, we tend to kind of believe that we can do anything, right? Like, this is the good, and we're going to go to the light. We're going to do that up by our bootstraps. We can even cheat death. I mean, at Reimagine, we talk a lot about what it means to really, really bear the truth of our mortality, which most of us don't want to do most of the time. But as you are really, I think, guiding us to consider, life has many shades, right? Many, many colors. And you actually write that paradox is at the root of your faith. And I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about the role of paradox in our lives, and maybe even read a little bit where I think you write so powerfully about what can come from eschewing those dichotomies, from resisting the black and the white, and how that's helped you, or maybe that's emerged out of your experience with folks suffering and struggling with decline.
Yeah. Isn't that just so crucial? Is, like you say, our cultures can be so black and white from the time we're very little as children. We get grades, right? We pass or fail, we succeed or we fail. How do we live in the tension between we are living and we are dying at the same time?
Yeah.
That we are vanishing, all of us, and we are not vanishing. If we can learn not to try to collapse the tensions every time we feel them, not to try to flatten the earth every time it feels a little bit bumpy, I think it creates space to be a little less fearful. And I know that's what you do at Reimagine. That's your work, Jeannie. Like to say, to talk about the taboo of death actually takes some of the fear out of it.
Absolutely.
We can play a little bit. We can imagine other possibilities about what death can be and what a funeral can be and the dying process can be. And I think the same with dementia or any kind of loss that we experience. What does it mean to open up the space and not divide things so harshly? I'm either sick or well, I'm confused or I'm lucid. That we kind of live in this tension, and that's okay. And as a person of faith, I live there, I guess, every day as a Christian in some ways. Jesus is gone. Okay, so the central figure of my faith died 2,000 years ago, like as Jesus of Nazareth. And yet, my faith is centered around Jesus not being gone. And that the Spirit lives on through the Holy Spirit, through our lives, and especially through the least of these. So this tension between gone and not gone, the invisible God, the visible, it's all there in my faith too. So I have kind of this natural language to speak. If we can harness that, I think that would really help us when it comes to facing dementia as well. And I'm happy to read a little bit. I think this section, Jeannie, if there's time.
Yes, please.
Okay. Dementia invites this kind of conjunction. There is dilution and distillation, constriction and expansion, disorder and constancy. Certain aspects of persons and their relationships fade, and other dimensions crystallize, possessing a new kind of clarity. Dementia places new constraints on communication, and relationships expand to include new ways of being and loving. Cognitive changes upset the usual patterns of one's life, and some rhythms remain unchanged. I heard a woman describe her spouse with dementia as my gone but not gone husband, and her phrase seemed to strike at the heart of dementia's paradoxes, an acute awareness of absence and an equal insistence on presence. Lately, I'm struck by its general relevance as I consider my own gone and not gone self. The cells that comprise my body, all of our bodies, routinely break down or slough off, and new ones take their place. Some cells, like neurons, die and are never replaced. Paradox lives at the heart of my faith, too. The gone and not gone ego, the gone and not gone Jesus. The play of presence and absence infuses all of life, I think, both before and after dementia. Maybe if we can learn to inhabit this tension, this space between opposites, then dementia and the lives it touches can rejoin the spectrum of human experience, rather than being reduced to tired tropes and burdened by outsized fears its sufferers and caregivers made to disappear. Imagine if we received all lives, those with and without dementia, as conglomerations of the ordinary and peculiar, the fragmented and the whole, the present and the vanishing.
That was beautiful.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
You're reminding me of a psychologist, Pauline Boss, who's written a very beautiful book years ago called Ambiguous Loss. And she's written about, for example, soldiers who are gone, but whose bodies have never been recovered, or depression, where a loved one is sort of there but not really there, and dementia. And what I hear you doing, and correct me if you think this is not right, in this little section, such a powerful section, is really naming the vanishing and the not vanishing, the gone and the not gone. That and as you said earlier, to hold both, that really is at the essence of paradox. But to name it, because part of what I think we so often struggle with as caregivers or loved ones is, as you say, is holding both and giving ourselves permission to feel the feelings we have about each one of those dimensions, the there and the not there. And it's that anguish that we feel internally. And now I'm putting on my psychologist hat, that I think can make the I don't want to say acceptance, but finding any kind of serenity around that companionship can be so difficult. I'm wondering if that resonates with you.
That resonates tremendously. You put it beautifully. And it's these tensions we live in throughout our lives that we have opportunities to practice. We're practicing on our way to death, or, I think dementia may be in my future, perhaps, but we're practicing along the way. Mm. What do we do with the ambiguity of loss? We have this word bittersweet in our language. I love that term, because we know what that feels. And I think bittersweet is so much of life. And when we only think about the bitter, or we only let people express the bitter in relationship to cognitive loss, we can miss the sweet. Yeah. And that doesn't go just with cognitive loss, but in all aspects of our lives. It makes us, I don't know, I think it kind of plunges us deeper into the heart of humanity. If we're able to kind of build up those muscles, those kind of spiritual, emotional, psychological muscles that don't leave us sort of withdrawing or hiding every time we're faced with something we can't fix.
Lynn, you said it so well, and Jeannie, you the words, Lynn, that you used, the space, and I love this, the space between the polar opposites. I think you quoted that from your book. I think that's amazing. And to be honest, I think we live 99% of our lives, in that space. And this is part of it. I love that phrase. So well put.
Thank you, Ron.
I also love the idea of practicing, right? That we don't wait until we get to the crisis. And you're reminding me of something I haven't thought of in many years. My older daughter is about to turn 26. And when she was graduating from preschool on her way to kindergarten, the head of the little school got up in a full cap and gown, and she said, and this has become the mantra of my family for 20 years, "Today is a day of mixed feelings." I'm talking to 4-year-olds. And she said, "We are so excited about where you are going, but we are also feeling sad because we're going to miss you." And it was so simple. Of course, the parents are all crying because we're also feeling lots of mixed feelings. But this has literally become a mantra for my children. And I think about all of the times in life where we are practicing exactly what you're describing. And I'm wondering if you have any examples in mind that might draw our attention to our lives as we are living them today, that where we are actually, as you say, building that muscle.
Jeannie, you made me think of that. I want to date myself here. Everything we learned in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. That book isn't that the truth? Mixed feelings and sharing and all of that. Yeah. So practicing, something that I've been trying to practice since encountering dementia is silence. And learning that through people who are much more practiced than myself. So I think one takeaway is we do this in community. We do this with others, this practicing. It's hard to be a lone wolf and practice these things. But I learned silence from a group of old women, old Baptist women, who were gathering every Tuesday at church at noon for centering prayer, which is a style of contemplative prayer in Christian life that goes through long periods of silence. And it was through that group who faithfully met every week without a lot of words, the oldest member being 98, that helped me learn this practice. And it ebbs and flows. I mean, there's no perfect practice. I mean, I go months and months without centering. But I think it's that kind of practicing that allows me to remember I am not my words. As a writer, I need to remember that. As a preacher, I need to remember that. I am not my words. When my words leave me, I am still me. I am still loved. When words leave you or my mother or my father, they are still them. And so I guess that practicing silence is helping me grapple with that now before I face perhaps the silence when I am without words.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's very, very touching and very inspiring. And since you brought us, sorry, Jackie, did you want to say something?
Thought just popped in my head when Lynn was just talking about the silence. And, my father also suffered from dementia, and pretty much for the last 5 years of his life, he really didn't speak much. But I really tried to make sure that I communicated with him with touch when I did visit him. So I would, I think that's a very strong form of communication, and we don't know at what level that does reach them, but I think it's really important to hold their hand and to continue to speak to them, and, as if they can hear every word you say and understand everything you're saying. But I think that the process of touching and holding and hugging and kissing, that is a very strong form of communication that we not forget. And I'm sorry I interrupted, but I just had to interject because Lynn made that pop into my head.
And I'll springboard that off that also, because sometimes with silence, and I've used this sometimes when you are you're kind of considering what your next thoughts are or steps are, and there's a period of silence. And it's true, people are uncomfortable with silence. They say that when you're doing speeches and things like that, that momentary silence, like what's happening and how you become comfortable. But silence is not an absence of feelings, thoughts, caring, sentiments, or anything like that. And it's something to really to embrace and embrace it as as an emotion, really.
It's funny. I was very nice, Vicki. Thank you. I had one client that described the dementia of her mother. She said, "My mother is closer to God, but her body is still here. And I love her so much." It was just I just remember the very interesting observation of the way she felt.
Wow, it's powerful. I know a woman who has dementia. And she writes about her dementia, and she said, "Please connect with me spirit to spirit." We're not going to have a cognitive exchange, she says in her memoir, but connect with me spirit to spirit. So I love that story. And Jackie, yes, touch and silence and all those things that remind us that we're bodies. I mean, think about our pandemic here, how we've just hungered for hugs.
Absolutely, that sense of connectedness, to others. And I really appreciate what you said, both of you, Jackie and Vicki, about finding other ways to be connected. It's so vital. So I think we have time, maybe, Lynn, for one last question. And you referenced this just a few minutes ago, and so I wanted to actually ask you not that this hasn't all been very personal, but even more personal, which is that in the book, you share that there was a decision point when you were trying to decide whether or not you wanted to undergo some genetic testing to see whether your grandfather's dementia might be passed on to you. And you decided not to pursue that testing. And this is certainly a huge question for many people with many disorders these days. But you recognize, as you said a little while ago, that the dementia may be in your future. And here you are, someone who is deeply connected to language and words and art and building connections, as we were just talking about. And you've already begun to answer this in your story around centering. But I wonder if you might share with us a little bit about why you decided not to get the testing done and how it's changed you to know that this is possibly a factor in your life in a more direct way than the rest of us may know.
Yeah, thank you for that. In the process of writing the book, which I started writing in 2014, and it came out in 2020, so six years. So writers out there, be patient. But words are such a part of me, and to be quite frank, Jeannie, part of my livelihood, it's how I pay my rent too, is as a pastor in a Protestant denomination, it's a lot about reading and words and texts and spoken prayers and all of that. But not getting the testing. So both of my parents have ApoE4, and they're open with that, and they allow me to share that. And so my chances of inheriting at least one of the alleles is fairly high. And it doesn't determine your life. It doesn't necessarily mean you will get late onset Alzheimer's, but it's increases your chances. So I discovered this with my parents 3 years into writing the book, and was kind of at this point where, well, do I get tested and then add that into the book? And all these questions arise. I decided not to, because it wasn't clear to me what that information would do. And I had written a book where I tried not to route everything back to the medical. And so it felt a little bit disingenuous to all of a sudden seek this out and to route everything back that way. So for now, I've decided not to. I may change my mind, and people have my parents find it empowering to know. And some people really do find it that way. For me, I'm just not sure. But that to say, knowing it could be my future and knowing it could be in any one of our futures certainly helps to break down some of the psychological barriers between us and them. That if you can imagine your own future as being touched by that personally, the hope would be you wouldn't run from that, but would say, okay, this may be part of who I am too. And what does that mean? And what kind of world do I want to create for myself and others, given this fact? So again, it leads me back to trying to learn from my dementia guides, from those who have experienced it. And one of the saints on the dementia unit would remind us that we don't have to keep it all together. So she would say that. So, we try to find our helpful guides and live with a measure of compassion and grace, and hopefully some humor and humility along the way too.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for being our guide tonight. I know that we want to open up the Q&A for questions. If anybody has questions for Lynn or for Ron and his team, we'd love to hear what's on your mind.
And if you raise your hand, I'll allow you to speak. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Lorraine, go ahead.
Yeah, so when was it that you decided to write this book? Like, what made you feel to write this book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I started writing in seriousness in 2014 after I left my job as the chaplain at a dementia unit. It finally gave me the space to really process all that I had experienced. And about that time, my grandfather also died. So I had been journaling for years. And as I talked about my initial tour of the dementia unit and kind of being told I wouldn't spend much time here, and then getting to know people. So I'd been journaling for years, but really began in seriousness after I could kind of have a little bit of distance and begin to process some of it on the page.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. And as Jeannie said too, there are a lot of really wonderful caregiving manuals out there and wonderful memoirs. The 36-hour day and, just incredible. But there weren't a lot of what I call like spiritual or existential. And I wanted to talk about those questions.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you did. Thank you. There's another question that came in, which I think is very interesting about, how to engage somebody who's been very intellectual for their whole life. And in fact, somebody shared that their dad had been a UCC minister and very intellectual, and it's really wondering how you reach somebody like that who's had a particular career and a particular dedication to the life of the mind.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for that question. And being a UCC minister, I'm sure. I would think his faith community would value his gifts and want to hear and be connected with him. So I encourage everyone, if you're connected to a faith community, even if it's been many years, please reach out and let that community know how to support you. I can't tell you how many times people I hear at the end of their life that they had dementia and no one called us at the church to let us know, but now we're doing their funeral. And my heart just always kind of sinks because we want a journey, or, faith communities, I say, that are worth any of their weight, want a journey with you and with family. So I guess that would be my first response when I hear he's a minister. See how that faith community can be connected. And yeah, we don't, as my friend Kate, who has dementia, says, just because I have dementia doesn't mean I'm stupid. So it's, who is the person? How there are resources available that say, we don't have to focus so much on memory. Let's focus on imagination. Let's create plays. Let's ask big questions. And so there's a movement, Ann Davis Basting, who's a genius grant, who writes on creative care and dementia. She says, forget about memory. Let's talk about imagination and let's ask beautiful questions. Let's ask beautiful, stimulating questions. So how about it, instead of, don't you remember when we did this? How about, what's the most beautiful sound in the world? And let's make it together. And so I think that kind of stimulation is so exciting, and we see that in the arts happening. And thank you for putting the link in the chat for Ann's work. Please check out her creative care. Thanks, Jeannie. Creative care book. And she also has this wonderful book. It's always on my desk. It's called Forget Memory. And all kinds of intellectual stimulation. So thank you for that question.
Great.
Your own father's example also possibly serves as another kind of imaginative way to respond to this, which is maybe there's a role for somebody who, for example, was a minister to kind of hold some of that identity in whatever setting or community he finds himself. And as you say, we're not stupid. So what would it mean to, call somebody father or pastor, or give them some connection to that role, even if it doesn't take the form that it took during the more active years, Somebody's asked, Lynn, whether you give Sunday services at Riverside Church.
Whether we have Sunday services?
I think the question is whether you are involved in Sunday services.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm on a staff team, clergy staff team, so I get to share the love, and we do sort of rotate. I'm not the senior pastor who mostly gets to preach, but I do preach throughout the year, and I am involved in services there as well. So we of course, I put out the invitation to please join us at the Riverside Church. We're now open in person on Sundays, social distance and masked, and we certainly welcome any one of you to come. And I'm always happy to share more about the church if you would like to reach out. But thank you.
Just so folks know, the church is sort of in Lower Harlem on about 120th, right, Lynn, and Riverside Drive, and is a remarkable place with many, many deep commitments to social justice and the community and seniors and all kinds of folks. So it really is a remarkable place, and I encourage folks to join Lynn on a Sunday and check it out.
Please. And our older adult group meets on Thursdays. We're doing a mixture of Zoom and in person in a big space. So there's plenty of opportunity to distance. So yeah, if anyone's interested in our older adult programming, please reach out to me. And we have a range of cognitive difference within our group as well, and try to speak to all who come. So
beautiful. Are there other questions? Are there meetups for caregivers? Somebody's asking. I don't know if that's specifically possibly at Riverside, looks like.
Oh, at the church. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Kara. We have some support groups at the church. We don't currently have one for caregivers. I do know that Caring Kind, which Jackie put in the chat, the Caring Kind organization has quite a few family support groups. And I often refer people from the church to these support groups with Caring Kind.
Yeah, Caring Kind is terrific. And also there's the Alzheimer's Association in New York City. That's terrific. And they both have support groups for caregivers.
Thank you, Ron. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'll start spreading my referrals.
No. Whichever one, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
So, Vicki, I know you wanted to share a little bit of information before we get off the line. You want to go ahead and speak up?
Sure. Thank you so much, Jackie. So I have to tell you, this was really an amazing conversation and discussion. It was so soulful, insightful, with passion. Thank you so much. I mean, Lynn, your book and your take on everything is just, it's just, truthfully, I'm really speechless about it. Thank you so much for sharing the readings that you did. Truly gives a whole different perspective. How insightful of you to recognize this, and once again, soulful for you to, capture the essence of this whole experience. Jeannie, you add dimension and class to these events in a way that I can't imagine anybody else. I don't know. We're just going to have to keep on calling on you. So, we hope that you heed the call, and we look forward to that. Ron, as always, hosting these events and hearing our ideas and giving us the ability to have these programs, which once again, what an amazing discussion. It just really is. Thank you so much for all the support. And Jackie, of course, who's the brains behind all these things with all your work and everything that you do and your dedication. It's really wonderful.
Thank you.
I had a talk recently with a colleague, and he was talking about an experience he had speaking with his wife, who ultimately passed, not from dementia. And they were having, as he told me the story, he was talking to his wife, and they got into the home care business from what they were doing, and they were just talking about death and dying. And his wife said to him, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of being forgotten. Mm. So I thought that, oh my God, that like kind of really made me reframe that concept. And so whether it's fear of being forgotten or vanishing, it's just, I think that we all really, whatever state that we're in, we want to be remembered. And there is beauty in what remains in our memories and whatever stage that we're at. And as a person who did most of her nursing work with the special needs population, a percentage of who had dementia, I can tell you there's all different forms of communication that you need to recognize and behold. Beyond the Book is a series that is ongoing. We are planning events right now. We do have something that we have confirmed on November 1st we'll be welcoming Harold Fernandez, an MD. Dr. Fernandez is a cardiovascular surgeon at Northwell, and his story, undocumented, tells of his experience as coming to this country as an undocumented immigrant, and what he had to do, his struggles, his challenges, his dreams. And he did this through many ways, but he attributes a lot of it to reading. And what he captured from that, it really is an amazing story. He went to some shabby university for his MD, I think Harvard. So he went from very humble roots to where he is today. We're really looking forward to welcoming him. We are also going to be a partner on that is going to be Book Fairies. I don't know if anybody knows about Book Fairies, the organization. They are quite amazing. And I'm just going to tell you about their mission. We're excited about this because I love it when things come together. But Book Fairies is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that collects reading materials for people in need throughout the metropolitan New York area. The reading materials foster literacy and academic success, provide a respite for personal struggles, and nurture the love of reading across age groups. So all of these have kind of coalesced in what we feel is going to be a really amazing discussion. We look forward to that. And by the way, November 1st is National Authors Day. So we invite you to join us, tell your friends, and keep in touch with us. And if there's any questions subsequently, please be in touch. And thank you so much.